Just yesterday, after seeing the Boone, North Carolina Bigfoot photo, I sent it to my grandparents who live in the mountains of North Carolina to get their reaction. What they told me next completely caught me off guard. They shared a possible Bigfoot encounter they experienced more than 35 years ago, a story they had never told me before. At the time, they were camping at Smokemont Campground near the Great Smoky Mountains. On their final night there, they were sitting around a campfire with several other campers they had befriended during the trip. Although they couldn't remember the exact time, they estimated it was a few hours after sunset. Without warning, they heard horrifying screams coming from nearby in the woods. They said the screams were unlike anything they had ever heard before, loud, guttural, and deeply unsettling. Everyone around the campfire immediately became alarmed, especially because the sound seemed so close. Then things got worse. They began hearing trees crashing to the ground, one after another, as the screams grew louder and closer. According to my grandparents, the noises seemed to go on forever. Terrified, they and the other campers retreated to their tents and hunkered down for the rest of the night, too afraid to investigate whatever was out there. The next morning, around 30 campers gathered together and decided to search the area where the sounds had come from. What they found shocked them. My grandparents said there was a massive clearing in the forest where numerous trees had been snapped from their roots and piled on top of one another. As everyone stood there trying to process what they were seeing, a park ranger arrived to investigate the commotion. According to my grandparents, the ranger's expression immediately turned stone-faced when he saw the scene. They asked him what they should do. The ranger reportedly looked at them and said, "Get the hell out of here while you can." Even now, more than 35 years later, my grandparents still consider that night the most frightening experience of their lives. In 2018, two friends were camping deep in the North Georgia mountains near the Chattahoochee River, an area locals had long connected to strange cryptid sightings. They had hiked about a mile into an isolated section of wilderness and set up camp far away from any roads or other people. As night fell, they lit a fire, ate dinner, and prepared to settle in for the evening. That's when something crashed into their campsite. According to the witness, a massive tree branch, nearly 5 feet long, suddenly came flying out of the darkness and slammed near their fire. It hadn't simply fallen. It looked as though it had been thrown. Both men immediately turned toward the woods. Standing only about 20 feet away, illuminated by the glow of the campfire, was what they described as a huge creature between 6 and 7 feet tall. The witness claimed the figure was covered in long hair and had broad shoulders, a beard-like face, and an almost human appearance. At first glance, they thought it might have been a man wearing a thick coat. But then it moved. The creature stepped backward into the darkness without making a sound. The campers were too terrified to sleep. They stayed awake the rest of the night feeding the fire and listening to strange noises coming from the woods surrounding their campsite. At sunrise, they packed their gear immediately and left the area. Years later, the witness still insists that whatever they saw that night was not human. Back in 2019, my friend and I decided to go camping deep in the Appalachian Mountains. We picked a remote area far from other campsites because we wanted complete isolation and a quiet weekend in the woods. The first day was completely normal. But sometime after midnight on our second night, I woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps outside the tent. At first, I thought it was a deer walking through camp, but then I heard another step and another. Whatever was outside sounded huge. I remember lying completely still, trying to listen. The footsteps circled our campsite slowly, almost like something was watching us. Then came the smell. I can't even fully describe it, like wet dog mixed with something rotten. It was overwhelming. A few seconds later, I heard what sounded like breathing right outside the tent wall. Not animal breathing. Deep, slow, human-like breathing. I was completely frozen in fear. My friend whispered, asking if I heard it too, and before I could answer, something slammed against a nearby tree hard enough to shake leaves down onto the tent. That's when we heard a low growl come from the darkness. Neither of us slept for the rest of the night. We stayed awake clutching flashlights and listening to movement around the campsite until sunrise. The next morning, we found massive footprints pressed into the mud just outside our tent. We packed our gear immediately and left. To this day, I still have no explanation for what was outside our campsite that night. About 6 years ago, I went on a solo hunting trip in southeastern Ohio. I had hunted in those woods my entire life, so I wasn't nervous about being out there alone. That changed fast. It was still early in the morning, just before sunrise, and I was sitting in a tree stand overlooking a clearing deep in the forest. Everything had been completely quiet for hours. Then suddenly, the woods went dead silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. A few moments later, I heard something large moving through the trees behind me. At first, I assumed it was a deer, but whatever it was sounded much heavier. Then I heard a loud knock echo through the woods. One knock, then another farther away. It sounded almost like two things communicating with each other. At that point, I started getting uneasy. I slowly turned around in my stand and scanned the woods behind me. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards away, standing between two trees, was a massive dark figure staring directly at me. I remember thinking it looked way too tall and broad to be a person. It was covered in dark hair, and even from that distance, I could tell it was enormous. The thing that scared me most was how still it stood. It didn't move. It just watched me. After a few seconds, it stepped behind a tree and disappeared. I climbed down from my stand immediately and got out of the woods as fast as I could. I've hunted my entire life, but I've never gone back to that area since. A few years ago, my cousin and I rented a small cabin deep in the forests of Northern California for a weekend getaway. The place was completely isolated, no nearby houses, no cell service, and miles of woods in every direction. The first night was normal, but on the second night, things got strange. Around midnight, we started hearing something walking outside the cabin. At first, it sounded slow and distant, but after a few minutes, the footsteps got closer. Way closer. I remember hearing heavy crunching sounds, moving around the cabin like something was circling us. My cousin looked out the window first and immediately backed away without saying a word. When I looked outside, I saw a massive dark figure standing near the tree line about 30 yards away. At first, I honestly thought it was a person, but it was way too tall. Even from that distance, I could tell it had huge shoulders and long arms hanging down near its knees. The entire body looked covered in dark hair. Then it moved. The thing stepped behind a tree, and for a few seconds we lost sight of it completely. That's when something slammed against the outside wall of the cabin hard enough to rattle the windows. We both froze. A few seconds later, we heard what sounded like deep breathing right outside the front door. Neither of us slept that night. The next morning, we found massive footprints in the dirt beside the cabin that neither of us could explain. We left immediately and never rented that cabin again. To this day, I still don't know what was outside that cabin that night. A few years ago, I was driving home late at night through a remote forest road in Washington state after visiting a friend. It was sometime after midnight, and the road cut through miles of dense woods with almost no traffic around. About halfway through the drive, I noticed something standing near the edge of the road ahead of me. At first, I thought it was a bear, but as my headlights got closer, I realized it was standing upright. I remember instantly getting this horrible feeling in my stomach because whatever I was looking at was massive. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, with incredibly broad shoulders and long dark hair covering its entire body. Then it stepped directly into the road. I slammed on my brakes as the creature slowly walked in front of my truck. For several seconds, my headlights were shining directly on it, and I got a clear look at its face. The best way I can describe it is almost human, but not human. Its face looked intelligent, and it never seemed scared of me at all. If anything, it felt like it was studying me. I was completely frozen. The creature stopped in the middle of the road, stared directly at me for a few seconds, and then calmly disappeared into the trees on the other side. The second it vanished, I hit the gas and drove the rest of the way home in complete panic. I still avoid that road at night to this day. And honestly, I still don't know what I saw out there. This is Peak Paranormal, where the unexplained becomes reality. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true paranormal and cryptid encounters. And if you have a terrifying experience of your own that you'd like featured on the channel, send your story to the email on our page. Your story could be next.